Hello and welcome to MEE Live. I'm Matilda Mallinson. It's Thursday, the 6th of August, 2026. Today we have a big show for you on the Ceuta border crisis. 1 week on, we examine the lasting consequences, how it's being used, and who is really benefiting. We'll re-examine the European story of invasion from a North African perspective, and we'll assess the evidence on whether the incident was orchestrated against Spain as punishment for its politics, among other things, on Gaza, or whether it was simply a complex collision of the many things broken in our world. Who benefited from the Ceuta border crisis? Hard-right politicians across the West were handed a ready-made, viral image and seized it like a lifeline. Trump, whose polls show support at near-record lows, immediately framed it as a midterms warning.
President Trump, talking to Fox earlier, says it's terrible. Remember that picture? That's going to be us in 3 years. If the wrong side gets in, if the Democrats get in, you will not live a very good life.
Another far-right party currently flailing is the UK's Reform, whose primary figurehead faces off with Count Binface amid a financial scandal. So when crisis hit a tiny Spanish enclave in Africa, one neither attached to Europe nor party to European free movement, to which the UK is not party to either, well then naturally Reform's Zia Youssef hopped on a plane.
You see 50,000 arrive in a single day. What happens? Spain sends its armed forces in response. 200,000 have turned up on British beaches illegally under Tory and Labour governments. Just because it's taken a bit longer makes it no less dangerous. Britain must secure our borders before it's too late.
Meanwhile, 22 EU member states signed a letter to the presidency. The bloc's right-wing factions are using the incident to push for harsher deterrence, though they did not stop to wonder why their recent deportation law, also justified as deterrence, failed to deter the Ceuta crisis itself. Italy suspended Schengen free movement with Spain for the month of August, despite Ceuta being outside the free movement zone. Morocco plausibly gained leverage from the incident, reminding Madrid of its grip on the Spanish border just after Spain's prime minister visited its regional rival Algeria. Criminal gangs, profiteering from desperation, sought to increase their market. One thing that's clear is who didn't benefit: the people crossing. I'm joined now from Ceuta by journalist Javier Jennings. Javier, welcome to MEE Live. You're on the ground. Can you tell us what the outcome has been for most of the people who made the crossing?
Well, the things that we're seeing on the ground are a lot of despair, a lot of uncertainty, and a lot of overall desperation, sort of like looking for an answer of what's going to happen to them. We've been here for the past 5 days, and first time I actually spoke to some of the migrants. They were, mostly Moroccan migrants, but then those days they slowly started being pushed back by the Spanish authorities, both Guardia Civil, Policía Nacional, military. And those who remained are the ones that are not Moroccan, most of them. Most of the ones who remain now are not really Moroccan. They come from countries like Sudan, Egypt, Palestine, Nigeria, Senegal, Yemen as well. And the first days they were camping around the center for the reception of migrants in Ceuta, which is the FETI. And this place has, I think, capacity for like 514 people. It's already overwhelmed because there are like 720 living there right now that have been taken in. However, there are, I'd say, like 1,000, maybe 2,000 people camping outside of it for the first 3 days without water, without food, without any help, without any support at all. And most importantly, without any information of what was going to happen to them. We saw the military doing some random roundups of these people, sort of having a bit of a psychological war against them, saying that everyone's going to be returned to Morocco. Then an hour later, they just leave, and everything sort of goes back to normal. I think overall it's very stressful for the people that are, not willing to go back to Morocco. These people have gone through a lot, both through the route and the time that they spent in Morocco itself. And now they just want answers. And they ask us journalists if we know anything. But the thing is, there's no official account of anything, really. No official news.
That uncertainty is really so difficult for people. Now, as you mentioned, the majority of those who crossed were pushed back. There were also a large number, perhaps an unknown number, who died. The death toll varies. Morocco only acknowledges, I think, about 11 deaths. Spain puts it, I think, 88 are confirmed, but Moroccan rights groups are saying 130, 140, possibly more people were killed and dozens are missing. Now, among those remaining, there are estimated to be maybe 800 unaccompanied children. Is anyone looking after them?
No, not at all. This has been one of the focus of my reporting for the past couple of days. Because, in Ceuta, you have the reception, the Center for the Reception of Migrants, and then you have like a specific center for underage migrant kids. Which again has been completely overwhelmed. So the protocol is when someone finds these kids, they take them to the police, and then the police should take them to the center. But the center is completely out of capacity. So the first few days when they were, pushing everyone back, sort of en masse, I myself saw and I heard directly from the soldiers, who obviously do not give, official interviews to anyone, that they had orders of just treating the children as adults, which is, if we find them, we just push them back. Of course, the kids are not dumb, so they've been sort of trying to avoid the authorities, the police, the military, and they're just left stranded in the streets, or worse, in the forest. And this is particularly worrying when it comes to young girls, because there's the vulnerability, the risk that they're exposed to is absolutely insane. And it's been actually the people from Ceuta, specifically women from Ceuta, who have sort of seen this situation and just said, no, we're not going to allow this. And I've talked to many families, many women that were taking children in. They were giving them hot shower, food, and shelter for the past 3-4 days. Thing is, obviously, these people also have families to take care of, work, everything. So now it's reached the point where it's not really sustainable. I did see in one of the neighborhoods near El Príncipe, which is a very stigmatized area. Paradoxically, I've seen a lot of sort of communal work regarding this. There's a guy called Abdallah, very young guy. He was out one night at 3 a.m. and he saw two small girls, like 14, 15-year-olds, having a conversation with some grown men, like in their 40s. And he was like, he got the sense that nothing good was going to happen, was going to come out of it. So he approached them, the men left, he just took them in, and then the day after, he decided to occupy a public football pitch in his area. He called every single person he knew and he knows in the area, and they're all sort of collaborating, coming together. They're bringing shoes, they're bringing clothes, they're bringing food, water, tents as well. So they sort of created a safe space for women, not just minors, but most of them are actually minors, where there's sort of rounds to keep the safe place and make sure that these women are not exposed to any risks. But this has been a completely citizen-led initiative. The authorities have not supported this at all. Yesterday they were having an issue because I don't know who they were calling. I don't know if it was the municipality or the local government, but they wanted toilets, these portable toilets, and no one was sending them over. So that's the situation.
Yeah. I mean, thank you for bringing us those community stories. They get so drowned in the coverage, and it's clear that Ceuta is really carrying the humanitarian toll here, and there has been a lot of rallying. I imagine it has also been incredibly trying for this city of 84,000 people who received an influx equal to 70% of its population. What has the impact been on the local community in Ceuta? How are they holding up?
Well, I think really the local community understand that the migrants are not the ones to blame for this, that the migrants are being used to exert pressure, even though, of course, there's no official account. You know, what the analysis is that they're being used as leverage to pressure Spain. And then at the end of the day, this is the price. These are the people that pay the price for, you know, on one hand, the EU dealing with authoritarian, mercenary, violent governments or regimes, but on top of that, and most importantly, from the EU, just thinking that they can handle humanitarian issues or structural post-colonial issues with very clear fingers to point at, just with money. Why? Because they've completely dehumanized these people. And the narrative in Ceuta, within Spain, has also dehumanized the people from Ceuta, because the people from Ceuta are the ones that, you know, sort of helped everyone in. So of course, you always get the right and the far right within Spain attacking those people for actually showing humanity or for being Muslim. They do not seem to fathom that some people can be Spanish, born and raised in Spain for generations, and actually very proud to defend the Spanish borders within a culture of military heritage that exists in this city, you know. Everything is compatible with being Spanish and proud of it. Mm-hmm. But the speech is capitalizing over this narrative, as you were mentioning in the intro.
I know, I mean,
so
the narrative is,
to go
of
back
course,
to your point.
Yeah, the narrative is, of course, is spread by the far right that Ceuta is a warning to the rest of the West of invasion. It's being completely turned into a global crisis story.
Just to go back to your point, you were actually telling us, asking me how this is sort of impacting these people, the locals, the people from Ceuta. They absolutely hate being used for someone else's political discourse, leverage, narrative. And they have gone out on the streets while already taking care of the children and the people, the migrants, offering as much help as they can. In broad terms, of course, there's people that, you know, got violent and were more hostile. But in general terms, that's the attitude. And they're very angry. They're very angry. They feel misunderstood by the politicians in Spain, but also the rest of Spanish society.
Yeah. And then the last question I wanted to ask you about was Moroccans living in Ceuta. I imagine this period where the army came in and began turning back. And as you said, it was specifically people who were Moroccan who were being pushed back. How did this whole episode impact Moroccans who were living in Ceuta?
I think there's a lot of nuance regarding this. Ceuta is a place where most of the people who are from Ceuta speak Spanish and speak Darija. So there really isn't a barrier between the Moroccans living in Ceuta and Ceutans themselves, you know? So they don't look at each other differently. Therefore, if these people had what we should call the privilege of being in Spain in a regular situation with all the paperwork, nothing would really happen to them, because the people that live here know who are locals too, the Moroccans that are local to Ceuta. And not just that, the military themselves, most of them are from Ceuta, so they can really tell apart who's a migrant and who's not. The ones that were most at risk were the people that were in the city, in the reception center, before this happened. The people that were already taken in and already had, you know, they had initiated their paperwork to be relocated into the peninsular Spain and other places, or those asylum seekers, if they look Moroccan and they had gone out these days with all the chaos, they were at risk of being pushed back, you know, because no one was checking for documents, no one was checking for anything that could, back that they've been here since before the crisis started. So these people were really at risk.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point. Javier, thank you so much for joining us and tuning in from Ceuta. That was really, really important perspective to hear, and thank you for your time. Now, one lasting outcome of the Ceuta crisis is a widespread false belief that Europe has been invaded. Will there be consequences for the disinformation about Ceuta? At least 88 people lost their lives. Almost all who crossed have returned to Morocco, and not one is confirmed to have entered mainland Europe. These facts don't matter to the far right.
60,000 illegal migrants forcing their way into Spain, and many of them may be heading to Britain.
I'm 42, and I know that that's it. That my country, my continent, my civilization, my freedoms, my way of life, my safety, my ability to walk around the streets where I grew up freely, I know it's over.
The irony, it's exactly this disinformation that helped cause the crisis in the first place. This open border narrative was echoed across Europe. Germany's far right disagreed with the UK's on just one point. It was Germany, not the UK, where most of them were headed. To Marine Le Pen, France's borders were the ones under threat. And all the way across the Atlantic, J.D. Vance claimed his territory was under invasion. Disinformation about Spain's open borders was one of the primary reasons given by the people crossing. Many said they believed that Ceuta was open and Spain couldn't and wouldn't deport them. None of this was true, yet it had been long implied by the far right. In April, when Spain offered legal residence to many undocumented migrants, Vox leader Santiago Abascal claimed Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez was working to replace Spaniards with foreigners. Czech Prime Minister Andrej Babiš, a billionaire Trump supporter, then blamed this law for Ceuta. The far right has repeatedly implied the law would allow any new arrivals in Sanchez's Spain to be naturalized. It didn't. And after 60,000 people entered Ceuta on false pretenses, Italy and Finland's far-right rulers called to exclude Spain from Europe's visa-free zone. They falsely implied Ceuta is part of the visa-free zone. It's not. Ceuta, an enclave in North Africa, is excluded from Schengen free movement and separated from Europe by sea. The far-right myth of Spain's open borders is echoed by criminal gangs. Children drowned in its name, while the European mainland remained unscathed. There may be no accountability for political disinformation, but that does not mean there aren't consequences. To better understand these questions of territory and sovereignty, we re-examine Ceuta through a North African lens. I'm joined now by Algerian researcher Hamza Hamouchene. Hamza, thank you for joining me. Far-right politicians from Spain, Italy, France, the UK, and even the US called the Ceuta crisis an invasion of their soil. Is that what an invasion looks like?
So I'd like to spare a thought for the more than 140 lives that perished through the crossing, because those victims and all the migrants that tried to cross the border are humans with their stories, with their grievances and suffering, but also with their aspirations and dreams. And I think any conversation about migration needs to start with those humans first. But the far right, and quite honestly, not just the far right, it's also we find those stories in the mainstream media, are not doing this. So instead of having a serious and honest conversation, the whole debate about migration here in the West and in Western media is reduced to these, racist stereotypes and Orientalist cliches of the hordes of humans, of black and brown bodies trying to storm the borders and invade the so-called Western civilization. Colonialism, neo-colonialism, and imperialism have a hand. They have a big responsibility in creating the conditions that force people to migrate and to cross borders. And in here we can talk about imperialist wars, political destabilization, but also how those countries are kept poor by various means, including structural adjustment programs, trying to push them to privatize and liberalize their economies, open them to foreign capital, so those companies and corporations comes and plunder the resources at the expense of the majorities living in those countries. So honestly, we need to start, having a serious conversation and introducing more nuance and complexity into the migration stories that we put forward.
It's interesting you bring up colonialism. Ceuta President Juan Jesus Vivas condemned the migration as a violation of Spain's territorial integrity. I was wondering, what about Morocco's? What questions does Ceuta raise about Morocco's territorial integrity?
Yeah, so this is what I was talking about in terms of the complexity of the stories. And whenever we dig deeper to understand the underlying causes that pushes people to migrate, we more than often, it comes back to questions of colonialism, neocolonialism, and imperialism. We talk about Ceuta, in Arabic is Ceuta, and Melilla, for example. These are what they call Spanish enclaves, right? But they are on North African territory. They are African land, but they are owned by the Spanish. And this is the legacy of colonialism, because Spain was a colonial power in North Africa. At some point in its history, it was forced out, but it maintained control of those territorial lands, Ceuta and Melilla. But I think the ironic thing in this story, at least for me, is how the Moroccan governments and the Moroccan regimes are playing the guardians of those enclaves on behalf of the Spanish and the Europeans. And this is, the problematic neo-colonial nature of the Moroccan monarchy.
Let's talk more about that. You say Morocco is playing guardian to these enclaves on behalf of the Spanish and Europeans. And you say that this is a neocolonial arrangement. Now, here, I think you're referring to the EU policy of externalization. Essentially, Europe paying foreign governments to police migration for it. What does that arrangement look like in reality?
Yeah, I think you are bringing an important point in terms of the externalization of border control. What we've seen in the last few decades is that the European Union and some European countries, especially the Mediterranean ones, have tried to coerce or push or pressure or even encourage North African governments to play that role in terms of becoming the guardians of Europe. And that's what you're doing basically by that. You're externalizing that control, but also you're shifting the social and human cost somewhere else that you don't see. So you're shifting the tragedies that we've seen in the last few days, you're shifting them to other territories, and you're putting the responsibility of guarding those borders and frontiers on the North African governments. And it's not just Morocco, by the way. It's also Algeria, it's also Tunisia, it's also Egypt. All of them play that role, of course, through economic and political coercion, but also through economic deals, because a lot of the agreements that we've seen lately in the last few decades come with a stick and a carrot. We want you to maintain the control of migration, and at the same time, we can do economic agreements, we can do trade deals with you, and so far. But this is comes with violence, cruel violence. We see many lives perish through this militaristic way of governing borders, and some of us call it, border imperialism. This is another aspect of imperialism. First of all, the externalization of borders, militarizing it, and creating more victims. And also we've seen it through other agencies, European agencies, Frontex, that coordinates with European governments, but also with North African governments in terms of pushing back the migrants towards Africa. And it's not just pushing back, it's killing them, drowning them in the Mediterranean intentionally. And this is really horrific.
How relevant is Morocco's severe cost of living crisis in explaining what happened at Ceuta? And without eradicating the local factors, how does that tie into this wider story you're telling of global inequality and exploitation?
we need always to start with the migrants themselves and their stories and the real causes that push them to leave. In the case of Ceuta, for example, some of those conditions is some rumors that went into social media saying, the border is relaxed, so we can go on. But without the underlying fundamental causes of poverty, war, displacement, people wouldn't go and risk their lives to cross. So we always need to start in that. In the case of what happened in Ceuta in the last few days, the majority of the migrants were Moroccans. And this is something that we need to have in the conversation. And why do North Africans, why do Moroccans migrate and risk their lives like this? Because they don't find economic opportunities, because their economies have been neoliberalized, because there are no jobs, because there have been austerity measures and budget cuts, especially around public services, for decades now. Morocco gives the image of a modern country. They're going to host the World Cup in 2030. They talk about football. We talk about tourism. But really, if you go to rural areas, you see a huge poverty. There is a huge economic marginalization that is absent of the story. And people, they are forced to migrate because of those conditions. They want jobs. They want their families to survive. They want to feed their own families. And I think it's really important to bring that story into the conversation to understand why the majority of the migrants, the 70,000 migrants that tried to cross, are Moroccans. And I think for me, this is the fundamental reason.
If not border securitization, what is the solution to that, though?
Honestly, there is no short-term solutions per se to the question of migration, because we need to first of all talk about the end of wars, the end of displacement, the end of political destabilization in those countries, and the end of popularizing and impoverishing policies that are usually imposed by international financial institutions, by the European Union, by European governments, maintaining those countries in a poverty trap and forcing those migrants in the first place. So that's why we need to have a serious conversation to find a solution, rather than militarizing and creating more problems, more death. Migrants will continue to leave as long as those conditions of poverty, war, and displacement are there. And I think people need to be free to move. That humanity has functioned like this for centuries, if not millennia. People move, and this is enriching. Migration is a beautiful story. It's not the story that they tell us here. We come to these countries and, we benefit from some of what it's in country, but also we enrich those countries in here. And I think this is something that we need to put on the table when we discuss these matters.
Hamza Hamouchene, thank you for your time. So what do we know about Ceuta? Between the 30th and 31st of July, dozens were drowned or trampled when upwards of 60,000 people crossed from Morocco into the Spanish enclave of Ceuta. By Saturday, Spain said nearly 50,000 had returned to Morocco, and it installed a 500-metre floating sea barrier. Experts point to criminal gangs, disinformation about Spain's recent migration policies, Morocco's economic crisis, and migrant mistreatment, plus possible deliberate weaponization. What does this mean? Weaponized migration is an accusation heard quite a lot these days. Europe accused Turkey of enabling crossings to Greece in 2020, Morocco to Spain and Belarus to Poland in 2021, Russia to Finland in 2023, and eastern Libya to Greece in 2025. In all those cases, there is evidence this weaponization actually happened. But treating migrants like pawns has been used in turn to justify extreme violence against them. The EU has legitimized shooting at refugees, detaining families, and removing human rights laws in the name of defending against hostile states weaponizing migration. Next up, we look at the geopolitical leverage gained from this episode and a three-way alliance emerging between Morocco, Israel, and the US. I'm joined by international relations scholar Professor Stephen Zunes. Stephen, welcome to MEE Live. Now, following the 2021 Melilla border rush, in which around 8,000 people crossed from Morocco to Spain, there was a deliberate decision, it seemed, to stand down Moroccan border guards to make a diplomatic point to Spain. Back then, Morocco was angered by Spain-Algerian relations, and 10 days before the Ceuta crisis, Spain's Prime Minister visited Algiers to discuss energy cooperation and the decades-old Western Sahara dispute with Morocco. Are we watching this same playbook today?
And not a coincidence. The incidental I should mention, the Melilla incident was regarding Spain allowing the president of Western Sahara to come to Spain for medical treatment. But indeed, Spain has been using this threat of mass migration to try to influence Spain or the countries on the Western Sahara question. They've essentially been extorting the Spanish government and elsewhere, and it's worked. Spain, after many years of being part of the international consensus codified by the United Nations and the International Court of Justice to allow for a referendum of the population of Western Sahara on their future status, Spain switched to support the position that Spain's autonomy plan should be the way to go. It's pretty phony. It's not really an autonomy plan. It would essentially be allowing this annexation. But basically, if you're a left-of-center government, you don't want to have a country like Morocco, which is only 18 kilometers from the Spanish mainland, not to mention the two presidios, to open the floodgates. Because if that happens, it's the left-of-center governments that get hurt, and it's the far-right governments that gain.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that situation.
Parties, the game.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that situation. I suppose, most mainstream coverage says that no hard evidence has been found that Morocco orchestrated this. There's motive, there's suspicious coincidence, but a lot of, I suppose, how can we be sure this is conspiracy and not circumstance? What evidence is there to work?
There are actually videos that show lorry loads of these migrants and other Moroccans coming to the border, border guards, that you don't know on the Moroccan side that normally police the frontier pretty tightly, stepping aside. The New York Times has noted this. The Guardian has noted this. Yes, it is. You don't get 50,000, 60,000, 70,000 people to suddenly simultaneously emerge at a corner of a country without some kind of major logistical support.
Do you think then that we will see actual leverage gained by Morocco and anything come of that? After the Melilla crisis, there was a recognition from Spain of the Western Sahara being Morocco's. Do you think that as a result of Ceuta, if you are right that this was a deliberately orchestrated ploy, that there might actually be diplomatic consequences from that gained leverage?
Well, the issue this time appears to have been Sanchez's efforts to try to warm relations with Algeria. Algeria is a major exporter of natural gas, and given the wars in Ukraine and in Iran, the access to natural gas, of course, is more limited. But that remains to be seen. But we're also already seeing some consequences in the sense that Sanchez has been weakened. There's divisions in Europe, and that's why some people believe, again, not a conspiracy. I haven't seen evidence of that Israel or United States orchestrated it, but the fact that the Israelis and the right-wing elements in Israel and the United States have been suddenly pushing this idea that Ceuta and Melilla should be part of Spain. Even though they've been Spanish territories for many, many centuries. I mean, legally, they're as much part of Spain as the Balearic or the Canary Islands. They're pushing the idea of Morocco and taking it over. And reasonable people can disagree about whether these presidios should exist as Spanish territory, certainly. But it's not like the right wing in the United States or Israel suddenly become anti-colonial.
Yeah, I mean, and we actually have some of those tweets that we can show, because I think it is relevant that among those really politicizing this issue were Israeli officials who aren't necessarily obvious spokespeople on this question between North Africa and Europe. So
and already the Israelis have jumped on it, saying, "Hey, Sanchez is a total hypocrite. He opposes what Israel's doing, but he is the occupier.
Yeah,
he is the bad guy."
That was Danny Danon, who's Israel's UN ambassador. He taunted Spain on X about the event, saying that it maintains colonial enclaves in Africa, so it shouldn't lecture Israel. Now, Spanish Minister Oscar Puente responded, "Well, it all seems to be becoming quite clear," insinuating Israeli involvement, although, this was not with any given evidence. But as one Portuguese ex-minister pointed out, whether or not the US and Israel were involved before the fact, they were deeply involved after the fact. Just elaborate on all this for us. Why exactly is Israel getting involved? Why exactly is Spain such a target here?
Well, Spain has been one of the most outspoken countries in Europe in terms of the genocidal war in Gaza, on the Israeli occupation, colonization, settler violence, and many other things that have concerned people that are concerned about Palestinian rights or simply human rights, international law in general. And so, Israel has a motivation of, making an example of them. Similarly, pro-Israel elements in the United States, some more right-wing pro-Israel elements that are close to the Trump administration have been pushing this as well. And of course, the United States itself has its motivation, certainly. The Trump administration has been quite angry and insulting and threatening in many respects to Spain because of their refusal to increase their military spending to the degree that Washington would like, and in particular for their opposition to the Iran war. They're refusing to allow U.S. Bases to be used in operations related to that are located in Spain to be used for U.S. military operations. And even they banned overflights by American military aircraft that are bound for that region. And so Trump ordered his Secretary of Treasury to cut off all trade with Spain. Of course, he was informed he couldn't do that because Spain's part of the EU. It's a single economic unit. But he was clearly looking for other ways of doing so. And again, we don't have a smoking gun that says the United States or Israel orchestrated this or put Spain up to it, but certainly I think you could say it emboldened Spain, because after all, if indeed, as I believe this was, a very orchestrated attempt to get tens of thousands of people to storm the border of a NATO country, one would think that the United States would protest this, but instead they're blaming Spain. And indeed, Trump has said, "Oh, this is what's going to happen to our border. Many times worse if the Democrats get back in." President J.D. Vance talked about these global elites and the like globalists and other people who have liberal policies. And if the goal of the United States and Israelis were, U.S. in particular in this case, is to divide Europe. They've had some success there with the reaction by a number of the more conservative European governments to this, and the general anti-migrant hysteria that has come up about the supposed invasion of Europe, even though, of course, Ceuta is not in Europe.
Yeah, there is a kind of fascinating, darkly fascinating overlap in worldviews there between that anti-migrant, hard right, in some cases very far right, radical worldview, anti-Muslim worldview, and the Israeli or the state of Israel's worldview that we've been seeing. And just to illustrate this, I want to play this clip from Tommy Robinson, one of the UK's, or maybe the UK's biggest sort of far-right extremist, where he directly compared the events of Ceuta to October the 7th.
Now picture this. All those people crossing the border are armed with AK-47s. They kick doors off and go house to house in Spain, raping, pillaging, murdering, beheading, whilst all cheering, whilst their entire country they've come from, Morocco, picture this, are celebrating as they bring the Spanish people back as trophies and celebrate and hide. Yeah, that's what fucking happened on October 7th.
I should say that all of the claims he made in that statement about beheadings and pillages, that is completely false.
Yeah, totally false.
Yeah.
So, no,
don't mean to platform that.
Exactly.
But that's an interesting overlap. And I think that something that's really interesting there is where Morocco comes into this, because you have talked about this, what Israel and the US have sort of to mutually gain from the narratives that have come out of Ceuta. But we see here a three-way alliance emerging between the US, Israel, Morocco. Now, Morocco is not a beneficiary of that Tommy Robinson far-right anti-Muslim invasion narrative, right? The Moroccans are not depicted very nicely in that video. So where does Morocco come into this three-way alliance? You talk about this nexus between the US, Israel, and Morocco, and how has that played out over this past week?
It goes back to the Abraham Accords, in which Trump convinced the Morocco to formally recognize Israel, breaking from the Arab League position that recognition of Israel would happen only after the occupation ended and the Palestinian state was able to emerge. But this was done in return for the United States to become the first country to formally recognize Morocco's illegal annexation of Western Sahara. Now, countries like Spain and Britain and France and others that have spoken favorably of Morocco's autonomy plan have said it in the sense that we think this is the best plan forward for a negotiated settlement. They haven't formally recognized the annexation. The United States became the first and only country to recognize Morocco's annexation, and Israel followed actually several months later, but Morocco, U.S. and Israel are the only two. And this is, of course, a very dangerous precedent. I mean, Trump did this at the very end of his first term, and much to many people's shock and surprise, he did not rescind it. And, of course, this led all sorts of people, and I know in my own experience, my travels in Africa, whenever I try to defend the Biden administration's position on Ukraine, saying, hey, we're upholding international law here. No country can expand its territory by force. No country can expand, their international boundaries. Everybody from cab drivers to cabinet officials would tell me, what about Western Sahara? So it very much weakened. Even Michael McFaul, who the former U.S. ambassador to Moscow, who's a big Ukraine hawk, even he criticized the Biden administration for essentially upholding the U.S. Recognition. So, but anyway, this three-way nexus between Morocco, Israel, and the United States, which includes arms transfers, technological transfers, other strategic cooperation, is very, very much part of Trump's worldview. I mean, he has a greater, let's be honest, he has a greater affinity to leaders like Netanyahu, like various autocratic Arab monarchs like Mohammed VI, than he does to the democracies of Western Europe. And so he has no problems working with the two of them to undermine European unity, promote the far-right parties, which his administration is openly allied with, and cause similar havoc.
Stephen Zunes, it's been a real pleasure having you on. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And to all of you watching, thanks for tuning in. That's all that we have time for today. Like, subscribe, make sure you're following us on social media at Middle East Eye. You can email meelive@middleeasteye.net. I'll be here live at 5 every Tuesday and Thursday noon if you're in New York. See you then.